Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and Designated Pilot Examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby. How are you?
I am fantastic as always. We've had a few requests come in lately, and we're going to try and incorporate a couple of those requests today. Today, we're going to dive into the oral exam component of an instrument check ride. And we're not going to cover everything, but we're going to give some tips and tricks and answer a few questions and talk through a few questions. But kind of part two of it is going to be some of the things that I see around the flight school from a education perspective and the way we teach and the way some students are incorporating the learnings and how they might have a mindset of learning the book stuff but not putting some practicality into it when they go out to fly. And that is something we want to help them with long term. And then Wally has seen some things on check rides where maybe the critiquing isn't being received as well. And we're both older men, and maybe we're both thinking this is a little part of the every kid gets a trophy or blue ribbon kind of mindset. And we want to turn everyone into somebody who wants to say, put me in, coach.
Yeah.
How many times do you think Jordan said, no, I don't want to play the last 6 seconds of the game?
Yeah, I don't think so. You know, Tom Brady wants the ball in his hand to the end of the game, you know, either for that game-winning drive or to run out the clock. And that's kind of what we're trying to instill. You know, I'm going through some training right now. I'm being trained on a new airplane, and I took my my simulator check several weeks ago, and I'm going through OE, which is actually flying the airplane with a check airman. And I've flown one trip so far, and it went really well. And but I found that my instructor would preface things like, he says, I'm going to be real nitpicky here. And I would just jump in and say, I want you to be really, really nitpicky. One thing, we were doing some pre-departure procedure where we were having to check our waypoints on our flight plan. And I'm not sure what I was saying as he was calling them off, but I wasn't saying checked. I think I was saying yes or something like that, or good or something like that. But I wasn't saying checked. And he pointed out to me that the book says that we are supposed to say checked. Now, I was communicating to him effectively that you know, we got the points the way they needed to be. But I wasn't saying what the book said to say, and I didn't take offense to that at all. I just
I was going to say, how did you take that? Were you about to cry?
No. I said to him, well, thank you, because I want to be 100%. I want to be 100% compliant 100% of the time. It's a little bit, you know, I'm gonna go off on a tangent here a little bit. I remember driving in a hotel van with my crew one time, and it was just us, and so there were probably 6 of us, and one of the crew members had gotten a speeding ticket, and she was pulling everybody in the van of what she could do to get out of the speeding ticket. And everybody had different things. Oh, we'll go to court because the police officer won't show up, and then the judge will dismiss it. And someone says, well, make sure you want to see the calibration record for the radar unit that they used and all this. And I'm just listening to this and kind of rolling my eyes. And she got to me, and I said, well, were you speeding? And she said, yes. And I says, well, why not pay the fine and go about your business? And everybody looked at me like I had corn growing out of my ears. I'm thinking, okay, you messed up, and you know, you do the crime, you do the time. And I think our society now is figuring out how to get out of it.
Right. Yeah. Not for the younger society, I don't think. I think you're right. They're going to try and figure out a way to get out of it. And as an ex-cop, don't speed.
Right.
Yes, I do speed, but I pay my tickets. So we're going to talk a lot about the accountability and the critiquing and the criticism. But let's talk through some instrument stuff. We were asked to kind of go through some check ride stuff and kind of share maybe a perspective of a student and the DPE as it relates to some questions that are on the instrument check ride. We're not going to get through all of them, but we're going to give you some tips and really my thought process as a flight school owner and the guy who hears students accomplish their instrument rating and then want to go take that first instrument flight. Things are different, and I don't know that they should be, but the check ride is a bucket of standardization. You need to know the material. You have to be at standards or better. And then the real world comes and you have all these other opportunities to put a bunch of practicality into am I flying. The decisions are different. The trips are different. It's not a check ride. It could be life or death in some cases. And then it really could be a very unimportant flight that you just immediately cancel because doesn't have much value for you or your passengers if there are any, Right. And so we're going to talk through these questions from an ACS and a standards perspective, and then we're going to try and put some of our own practicality into it, and then we'll talk about some critiquing as we wrap up the show. So I looked through a number of resources, but I know you gave me my instrument check ride, and we talked about a number of these things, but the first thing that I remember was something that I struggled with, and maybe shouldn't have, were the types of ice. You ever talk about the types of ice, Wally?
Yeah, absolutely. Icing is a bad deal in these airplanes. As a private pilot, I talk about it a little bit, but theoretically, as a non-instrument rated private pilot, you can't fly into the clouds. So, icing probably isn't a concern so much. I mean, you could have visible moisture above you that's falling down and causing ice, but it's certainly it's part of the requirements. I mean, we have to talk about weather information, and I try to hit the big things, and icing will kill you.
No doubt, and you got to be careful. And so, if I was a student, maybe an applicant in your check ride, and I don't know what the right way to do this is, but if I were to say, hey, I know that there's rime ice, I know there's clear ice, and I know there's mixed ice, and clear ice is going to accumulate a whole bunch. I'm going to get real heavy real quick. Rime ice is going to change the airflow over the wing and could create all kinds of problems with that. And mixed is a combination of both of those. Rime can probably get there a little warmer than clear ice. Is that a good enough answer? Is that do I know my material at that point? Do you feel like I know my material?
Yeah, I would say so. And I'm probably not so much concerned about knowing types of icing as what conditions are conducive to icing. I think knowing the standard lapse rate, based on an outside air temperature of 12 degrees, what is the standard lapse rate? 12 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius. So 6,000 feet above the ground at 12 degrees is where we would expect the freezing level to be. Of course, that's a standard atmosphere, and sometimes we don't, or a lot of times we don't have that. But it gives you an idea of where the ice probably or might be. At least it's a starting point.
Sure. And I think back to, we did a show not too long ago on personal minimums. I get you need to know standard lapse rate, but if I go outside today, and we're in Texas, so it's already really freaking hot here, but if I were to go outside on a cool day and I was at the surface and it was, let's say, 15 degrees Celsius, and there were clouds at, 10,000 feet, the standard lap rate it's probably not going to put me in that cloud, and my plane's not going to put me in those clouds. But if I'm out here and it's 6 degrees Celsius and it's marginal VFR, don't you think everywhere visible moisture is, there could be icing?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm a no-go. Like my personal minimums say 5,000 feet from where a standard atmosphere would create problems for me.
Right.
I don't care if they say it's really warm up there. I got 1,000 PIREPs that say Don't worry about it. There's no ice up here. I ain't going.
Right.
Because it doesn't take about 5 minutes of one non-standard atmosphere to bite me in the butt really, really quick.
Yeah.
Do you talk about obtaining weather?
Yeah, absolutely. And usually, every check ride that someone does with me, you're going to plan a cross country unless it's an add-on rating. But so for a private, commercial, or a instrument, you're gonna plan a cross country trip. And what I find kind of strange is, and I tell the applicant, I say, for our purposes, you own the certificate or the rating that you're applying for. Okay, so if it's an instrument check ride, for our purposes, you are instrument rated. And I will tell them, okay, maybe you took your instrument check ride 3 months ago. I usually give them a time frame because we're going to talk about currency, and so that comes into play. But I will say, okay, so we're going from point A to point B, and I'll ask them about the flight. I'll say, okay, are you going nonstop? Are you making a fuel stop? And they're both right. If you can go nonstop, you can go nonstop. If you want to make a fuel stop, that's okay too. But I will always say, would you make the flight today? And I'm a little bit perplexed at the number of instrument people that will say, oh no, I wouldn't make the flight today. And I'll say, why? Well, and we do use real-time weather. I mean, this is the real weather, the forecast or the current conditions from a given check ride. So I can't, all the answers are a little bit different. But a lot of times the applicant will say, well, hey, at the point that's halfway between here and A and B, it's 1,800 broken, and that's below my personal minimums. And I want to say, but you're instrument rated. And a lot of times they'll say, yeah, but I'm not ready for this. And it's a little bit of a head scratcher because you want me to certify you to do this, but you're not willing to do it. It goes back to the put me in coach. Hey, I want to try out for the high school football team, and I want to be the kicker. And when it comes down to the last 3 seconds of the game and we're down by 2 and we've got the ball on the 12-yard line and it's going to be about a 30-yard field goal, and the coach calls me and I say, no, I don't want to go in.
25 yards is my personal minimum.
Yeah, exactly. It's you want someone, you don't want to be, I don't know what the right word is, but you don't want to be overly aggressive, but you want someone that has that Michael Jordan of attitude of, put me in, coach, give me the ball.
What about the person listening right now, though, that says, look, I was a private student not too long ago, and I learned about all these attitudes and mindsets, and I shouldn't have it won't happen to me mindset, or I can go do it kind of mindset. Where are we not talking a little bit about those boundaries there?
Yeah, we are. But at some point, and I run into this a lot on commercial check rides. I will try to push the boundaries with the applicant of things going wrong with the airplane. It's real. I will say maybe a system or component of the airplane is inoperative, and they say, well, I'm not going to go. I'm just going to cancel the flight. And we're trying to troubleshoot to maybe fix the problem. Maybe we're talking about a
light bulb.
Yeah, it could,
nav light.
A nav light, and maybe there are provisions to where we can make the flight with that in op, or maybe we can fix it. Maybe there's something going on with the engine on the run-up that you've discovered, and there's a procedure in the flight manual to clear a fouled spark plug. Well, if we can do that, at some point we want to be mission-oriented. We've talked about that on many episodes, being mission-oriented, because as a commercial pilot, you keep canceling. At some point, you might find yourself out of a job.
Yeah, so we did get a little distracted there. We talked about obtaining weather. If I told you as an applicant that I would think big picture first, get smaller along the way, I'd look at aviationweather.gov, look at all of the forecasts that would possibly impact my flight. I'd look at if there was a TAF available where I was going and where I was leaving. I'd look at that, METARs along the way. I'd then call a weather briefer and talk to them. Obviously, if it's an IFR flight, which would be in this case an instrument check ride, I'm going to file that flight plan, listen to the briefer, ask advice of maybe more senior pilots around me. Would you say that would be I did the right things to obtain weather?
Yeah.
And then maybe quiz me on every one of those aspects.
Yeah.
What types of forecasts are there, et cetera, right?
Yeah, and just looking out the window. I can tell a lot by looking out the window, or walking outside, feeling the temperature. I know we've said this. We're in the Gulf Coast. If we walk outside and it's warm and muggy, the wind is probably out of the south. If we walk outside and the temperature is unseasonably cool, which for summertime we would be in the low 80s. We'd walk out and say, "Oh, I need a sweater." The wind is probably out of the north.
No question. Yeah. Let's move to the departure phase of flight in an instrument flight, maybe. Do you talk about departure procedures in the oral exam?
Yeah, absolutely. We're required, so we do talk about a SID, standard instrument departure. How we would fly that. We would, we might get a radar vector to a fix. We may get a radar vector to intercept a radial, and how we would set all that up and be ready for that. And something that I talk about with the applicant is just as simple as how to obtain your clearance. And most of the applicants are really good at how to obtain their clearance at their home airport. But how do you obtain a clearance at not your home airport? In other words, if you're at a controlled airport, you just call ground control or clearance delivery, and they read it to you. But if you're at a non-controlled airport, how do you do that? How do you get that clearance? And there are several ways. I mean, you can do it via phone call. You can do it in the air if you're able to depart VFR. But a lot of people struggle with how to get that clearance at other than their home airport.
Yeah, phone call's probably the best and really the easiest.
Yeah.
What about ODPs? Do people obstacle departure procedures, right? So you're in a rural area, maybe you have some terrain. There's probably something listed that would be in the terminal procedure.
Yeah.
And you need to know those. And that's not going to probably be part of your clearance delivery. You're going to have to fly that because it's part of that airport, right?
Right. And, a lot of times figuring out how to get a clearance is as easy as talking to someone who's at the airport. Hey, how do you get your IFR clearance out of here? Oh, call clearance delivery on this frequency, maybe from the airplane, or, hey, I've got the phone number here, right here.
Something that I think I tried to memorize all these different ones, but VOR checks. There's a standard and there's 5 options, I believe, that you can choose from. But what do we really do in the real world, Wally? How do we do our VOR checks in the real world? 91% of us.
Well, in the real world, I mean, you're going to get up and you're probably going to be using GPS and compare the VOR to the GPS, or if you have 2 VORs, comparing them against each other.
Yeah, the dual VOR check is by far the one we do 99% of the time. But
right.
Do you go through with an applicant and they go through the 5 ways that you can do a VOR check and test them on all that stuff?
I probably don't get into that maybe as much as I should. You've kind of told me that maybe that's something I could add to my repertoire. And we do talk about the
No,
VOR
I'm not.
check.
No one wants me to do that. Make your check rides more difficult.
Yeah, no. We do talk about the requirement for a VOR check.
One that I stumbled across when I was preparing for this podcast that I honestly struggled with, because it's this memorization thing that didn't have a whole bunch of practicality for me, was the transponder codes. Do you talk about transponder codes in an instrument check ride, or do you leave that for your private students, applicants?
We will talk about loss comm in an instrument check ride, and that will normally come up, loss comm, transponder check. Now, and I will expand that a little bit and talk about reasons for loss comm. I mean, most of the airplanes that we're flying have pretty good radios. They're usually very reliable. Most of the airplanes have at least two, or have two communication radios. So the chances of one going out is very slim. The chances of both of them going out are extremely slim, with the exception of a total electrical failure.
Which means I'm probably going to lose my transponder pretty quick, too.
You lose total electrical failure, you've now lost because I'll ask somebody, okay, well, with a loss of comm, what do you do? And they talk about, how they would fly. And I'd say, well, how are you going to navigate if it's been a total loss of electricity? And a lot of times they'll say, well, yeah, I'd lose my GPS, so I'd have to use my VOR. Okay, so is it a solar-powered VOR? And then it's a head-scratcher, and they say, oh, boy, yeah, I can't navigate. So how would you get down? And that's the big thing. I mean, single-engine airplanes usually has one alternator. Some have two. But if you do have a loss of electricity, it can be a very challenging situation.
That's definitely an emergency, though. No question.
Absolutely.
No question.
Absolutely.
Declare your emergency and get some help.
Yeah.
I can say the heightened awareness, and I normally fly something with a standby battery, but if I was in a single engine, single battery, single alternator aircraft, I would be watching my voltmeter and my ammeter religiously throughout the time I'm flying in IMC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're going to get an indication, and probably that indication is going to give you enough time to get to VMC and make that not quite as dangerous for sure.
Yeah.
And you got to challenge yourself. You got to say, put me in, coach, and figure out what are you going to do if you don't have that time. How are you going to handle that situation?
Yeah.
I had an instructor that had me fly the sim and slowly failed everything one time. I'm in full IMC in a simulator, and all I got left is the compass. And I was amazed that I was able to keep my heading. Didn't matter what heading it was. And I kept descending slowly but surely, keeping my wings as level as I could so that compass didn't move. And I came out of the clouds and could fly the plane, right?
Right.
But if you don't practice that and you're a single pilot, that's going to be very hard to do the first time that it ever happens really in the air.
And that goes back to the weather briefing we mentioned earlier. You mentioned, big picture. Okay, weather is really bad. Well, I won't say bad. Let's say it's 1,000 overcast between point A and point B. Well, where's the good weather? Is it to the left? Is it to the right? Is it a little bit beyond my destination, or is it back behind me? So which way am I going to turn the airplane if things go bad in a hurry?
This is the practical pilot conversation. There was a air safety video I watched. I remember watching it a long time ago. A guy pushed himself to his limits, and I believe the controller kept telling him, that there's clear weather 10 miles east of your current flight path. And at that time had plenty of fuel, plenty of time, obviously, and kept trying to make that approach at that airport, and ultimately ran out of fuel and got hurt really bad or got killed. And it was this whole, man, why would I go that 10 miles over there, right? We could second guess everybody, but there's there's a real out like that, man, you got to take it, especially if that alternator's quit providing volts
Right.
to that battery and the amps are being sucked out of that battery. You need to go somewhere quick.
Yeah.
No question. So I sucked at transponder codes. I came up, somebody shared a mnemonic with me that I loved, or a saying that I love. Do you have any memorization sayings for transponder codes?
I don't.
So somebody told me, and it kind of goes in order, that if you ever get confused, if you say, "Hi, Jack, I can't talk right now, I'm having an emergency," that you would know the order of those transponder codes. So "Hi, Jack" is 7500.
Okay.
"I can't talk right now," 7600. "I'm having an emergency," 7700. So a good little way for any pilot to remember if you don't keep those top of mind for you. "Hi, Jack, I can't talk right now, I'm having an emergency." We talked a little bit about activating and closing those flight plans at those non-controlled airports. What about some just other stuff? I'm making some assumptions. You're the DPE, but I would assume new, minted, almost minted instrument pilots, you ask some questions about approach plates or whatever else, they're going to fumble and stumble because they've just not been interacting with them a lot.
Yeah.
How many people struggle with missed approach points on approach plates?
A lot of people do. And
That's a pretty important thing to know.
That's a very important thing to know. What defines the missed approach point? And so many times I will say, okay, on this approach, and I'll just pick random approaches. A lot of times before an instrument check ride, I'll get a call or a text message or an email from the applicant, and they'll say, "Hey, what approaches can I expect?" And I'll say, "Well, I don't know. It's a function of winds around here. It's a function of we've had a rash of ILS approaches being out of service around here. So it's not that I'm trying to keep it from the person, but I don't want to tell you we're going to do approach ABC and then the winds are different that day, and really we're going to do approach GHI." You should learn how to interpret an approach plate. You shouldn't memorize a given approach plate. Now, if you do one long enough, you will sort of begin to memorize it. But so many times I will say, okay, on this approach, when do we go missed approach? And I'll say, well, when we hit the end of the runway. And I'll say,
The applicant will say that.
yeah, and I'll say, well, okay, or I shouldn't say hit the end of the runway. When we get to the end of the runway, and I'll say, well, okay, well, why would we go missed approach? And they'll say, well, when I don't see the runway. I said, well, if you don't see the runway, how do you know you're at the end of the runway? And I usually get a kind of a deer in the headlights look. So knowing how the missed approach is defined, the missed approach point, I should say. And on some approaches, it's an intersection. If it's an RNAV approach, it may be Freddy intersection is the end of the run, is the missed approach point. It may be a distance off of a VOR, maybe if it's a VOR approach. It may be timed. It may be all three. There are approaches that have, you might have a named intersection, which is also a DME off of a VOR, and there's also a timed option. So we could go fly a given VOR approach with just a VOR. That's all we need. We don't need DME. We don't need GPS. And again, for a precision approach, the missed approach point is usually going to be a decision altitude. So if you see MDA, it's the minimum descent altitude. The missed approach point is not based on an altitude, but if it's a precision approach where you have vertical guidance, you'll see a DA or a DH, decision altitude or decision height.
So somebody's listening and saying, well, I just look at my screen and it says missed, right? It's going to sequence for me.
Right.
That's where I go missed.
Right.
Is that a bad habit?
That's a horrible habit. That's horrible.
But I think is amazing about the G1000, and if you load a VOR into the G1000, it starts the clock. It does everything like you should as a good pilot, right?
Right.
And so it doesn't really matter what equipment you're using. You could have literally two steam gauge VORs, probably even down to one VOR in your system, and shoot a VOR alpha approach.
Right.
And you got to use a clock, you got to use some other stuff, but you can shoot that very safely in those circumstances. So make sure you know how to do that stuff, and make sure you know where the missed approach point is, and call missed and go missed.
And speaking of clock, I will say this, a lot of times we have just turned into button pushers, but when we push a button, let's make sure that the thing that we're trying to start, if you will, in this case a clock, make sure it starts. Because a lot of times you have one button that starts it, stops it, and resets it. So if the last time that somebody manipulated the clock, maybe they stopped it. So you push the button thinking you're starting it, well, you're resetting it. So, you walk into a room and it's dark, you flip the light switch on, you check to make sure the lights come on, right? You don't just go about your business even if the lights are off.
You may be happen to talk about a transponder right now that automatically starts the clock when you leave the ground, and some people probably push that button thinking they're starting the clock, but they're stopping the clock.
And they've just stopped it. They have just stopped it. And then you say, how are we doing on our time to our first waypoint? And they look over and the transponder has 7 seconds on it.
We have at least one listener that knows who we're talking about.
Yeah.
We do love you.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little philosophical feedback, criticism. You give a lot of it, I'm assuming. I'm assuming you give some on great check rides, and I'm assuming you give some or maybe a little bit more on bad check rides.
Yeah.
How does the general public take your feedback on check rides?
Pretty good, and a lot of the feedback that I'll give on check rides is good feedback. Reinforcing what they're doing. Every test is a little bit different, but a lot of times I will say, critique yourself, and usually the applicant is just crazy critical on themselves. Well, I did this and I did that, and okay, and it's minutia. I mean, they're usually pretty doggone critical of themselves. Most people, and then I'll say, well, just overall, how did it go? Well, I think it went pretty well, and I'll say, yeah, I agree. I thought that the way you handled this situation was really good. A lot of times it might be that I'll say I hadn't even thought of doing it that way, but that was a really good decision. How about the your I don't know,
hold?
How did the hole go? Well, initially, I was thinking it was a teardrop entry, and then I got close, and so I was kind of fumbling around, realizing a parallel entry was really the way to go. And I'll say, okay, I agree. It initially you started to turn the wrong way, but you got things squared away, and you entered the hold, and it met the standard.
What happens when someone doesn't take your feedback well?
Well, that doesn't happen. I haven't. I try to be very respectful of them, and but what you see is the applicant go into shutdown mode, and I try to recognize that, and I tell them right away, okay, you didn't meet the standard. The check ride is going to be unsatisfactory, and they usually know that. I don't know if I've ever had someone that when I told them that they were surprised, disappointed themselves. Very occasionally, you everybody has different emotions.
Sure.
And it's hard to figure out. You know, they're not happy. They're usually mad at themselves more than anybody else because they know what they did, and sometimes I have to help them see what they did. But with the technology now, I mean, we have track logs. I have the ability to take pictures of the panel, and I can say, yeah, right here you are. You're 200 feet below MDA, and you still got the hood on, and that's probably not where you ought to be.
Yeah, for sure. Is there some advice that you might have? We obviously talked a little bit before the show. Is there something you would tell that person that maybe doesn't get a lot of feedback, doesn't get a lot of criticism, how they should internalize that critiquing or feedback that you're giving them?
Yeah, well, I would just say that, you know, especially if you aspire to do this for a living, you know, we aspire to have a flight that's 100% correct, and that will never happen. You know, even at my airline, we realize there is no such thing as the perfect flight. But, you know, that's what we're shooting for. You know, I've used this analogy. I mean, a baseball team's goal at the beginning of the season is to go 162-0. It's never happened, and most likely will never happen. I mean, there's never a team that goes out and says, yeah, well, this is the game that we're going to lose. They're trying to win every game. So that's what we want to do, but if you're going to do this for a living, you're going to be evaluated probably more than once a year throughout your career. I've had check rides where I have walked away with my head low, thinking, "Oh man, you know, I'm a little bit embarrassed. I blew that." Okay, and you know, fortunately for me, most time you walk away feeling pretty good. Think, okay, yeah, wow, that was a nice, you know, confidence builder. Boy, you know, we were in a really tough situation, and it turned out fairly well. So you got to be bulletproof. You know, I don't think anybody who is evaluating you is critiquing you. They're critiquing your performance. You're critiquing what you did. You know, it's not a personal attack on you. It's you know, how you handled it. And what at the end of the day, I think what we have to learn is, or what we have to know, is that this could kill you. This is not messing up your tax return and putting some wrong numbers in there, and the IRS comes calling 3 months down the road and says,
By the way, that would suck. But
yeah.
But it's not.
Oh,
the end
I've
of the
gotten
world.
that letter. And when it's really thick, you know it's not good. But you know, it was fixable. You go, oh, gee, yeah, I did mess that up, and here you go.
Yeah, those letters are no fun. But I also have a 22-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old son, and you know, they've played sports, and she's been in band, and they've received some critiquing. But I've tried to tell them the same thing you just mentioned, right? Is it a personal attack, or is it something about your actions that's hurting your feelings right now? And if it's something about your performance, or someone's giving you a piece of information that will make you a better golfer, make you a better student, make you a better band performer, you should embrace that. Like,
Yeah.
The reality is you're not going to get a lot of great criticism because it's kind of a dying thing. So
Yeah.
if an expert, a pilot with 34 plus years of experience, wants to give you some advice, man, open your ears, dive into it, take a hold of that criticism, because it's going to maybe save your life, but it's going to make you a better pilot.
Right.
And that's what we all really are here for, is to become better pilots and get better at our craft, for sure.
Right. I just a couple of days ago, I was in a parking lot, and I drive a Jeep, and I was getting in my Jeep, and a guy came up to me and he said, "Hey man, if you're looking to get your windows tinted, there's a place down the road that I just have mine tinted at, and I'd really recommend it. You know, if you're looking to do that. And I just took the guy's advice. I said, "Oh, thank you, appreciate that." I didn't take that to mean, "Hey, your Jeep looks horrible because the windows aren't tinted." I didn't get offended. I took the guy's advice, and who knows? Maybe I will get them tinted. I don't know.
Well, I think social media is doing this to the younger kids, where they get a bunch of likes or not likes, and they immediately judge their photo, themselves, everything.
Yeah.
Don't let that be you. I think the criticism is something that will make you a better pilot. Learn to take it, learn to embrace it. It really is a gift, and it is a good gift. With that, I think we'll wrap up the show. Put me in, coach. You want to be the one at the yoke. You want to be the one taking the challenge on, but don't exceed those personal minimums. As always, fly safe and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.